Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Jeanette Coleman. I'm the Director of Human Resources for Axcet HR Solutions. With me today is Corey McClush, who is a Human Resource Consultant here at Axcet, and we also have Beth Folk from our Marketing Department, who will be monitoring the webinar and helping with any logistics or tech support. Before we get started, let's cover a few housekeeping items. Today's presentation will last about 20 minutes, and we will be recording this webinar, so you'll receive a link to review the information again if you would like. We have muted everyone's phone, so if you have any questions, please use the chat button. The chat button is on the top left-hand side of your screen. With that said, I'll turn things over to Corey.
Thank you, Jeanette. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join us. So today we are going to briefly discuss why you should care about preventing harassment in the workplace. So I don't know if you've noticed lately, but sexual harassment has become somewhat of a hot topic. I anticipate it will only increase. We'll cover more than just sexual harassment here today, but the topic of harassment has come up in the media due to increased sexual harassment claims. Now, I realize this topic can be awkward to discuss, but it's still important to address. A study by the Society of Human Resource Management found that 1/3 of companies had dealt with harassment claims within the last 2 years. And again, I really anticipate this increasing. So all employee conflict, whether it arises from harassment or not, takes a toll on employees, your work teams, departments, and the organization as a whole. So your organization should be committed to providing a safe and positive working environment. And just a tip here, one of the best ways to do that is to provide training. So, as I said, stories of workplace sexual harassment have become so commonplace, so much so that they've led to a nationwide movement memorialized by #MeToo. So you'll see on your screen a few hashtags that have come up lately. #HowWillIChange was actually in response to #MeToo. And for those of you who don't know, #MeToo was literally in response to sexual harassment, particularly those in authority. And then that #HowWillIChange was actually a male's response to the #MeToo. So fueled by almost daily media coverage, awareness of and sensitivity to inappropriate workplace behavior has skyrocketed. So again, those are some of the hashtags that you can find out there today. If you Google workplace harassment, the things that are going to show up are things like attorneys' links, EEOC, definitions on what harassment is, and instructions on how to file a claim. So all that to say, our social media climate has really changed, and there's a heightened sense of awareness and sensitivity toward harassment, all of which trickles over into the workplace, which begs to question, has your workplace taken the right actions to ensure a harassment-free culture? And in case I don't have your attention yet, let's look at some stats. And this is directly from the EEOC. For those of you who don't know, the EEOC is the federal agency that would investigate claims of harassment. So the numbers that you're looking at on your screen are for the fiscal year 2017, which I'm sure you know is through September. I just want to point out that for those of you who are really good at math, those percentages add up to more than 100. And the reason for that is usually when a claim is filed, it actually includes more than one protected category. I do also want to point out that retaliation is 48.8% of all the charges filed. You might take note of that. We'll speak on that in a little bit. The EEOC announced that 84,254 workplace discrimination charges were filed with the agency during the fiscal year 2017. Just want that to sink in for a minute. 84,254. That's a lot of charges. And the EEOC secured $398 million for victims. That's private sector as well as state and local. All of these stats are available on the EEOC website, and I would encourage you to go there to look and read a little bit more about that. So again, with all this media attention, I anticipate that these numbers will go up. You can actually compare fiscal year 2017 to previous year, and you'll see that those numbers have increased. So out of 84,000 claims, it only takes one incident for you to create a negative consequence for your workplace. So let me ask you a question. Would you know what to do if you received an employee harassment complaint? And I want you to just think about that for a moment and really consider, literally, would you know what to do? What would the next step be if an employee came to you with a claim of harassment? How would you respond, and how would you resolve it? So I'm sure some of you are thinking, yes, absolutely, I have a strategy in place, we're good to go. That's great. And I'm assuming that some of you are thinking, nope, I have no idea, and that's why I'm here. So I'm glad you're both here, and I would like to say that, if you already have a strategy in place, don't check out just yet. I hope that I'll be providing you good information, and it might be time for you to actually review the processes that you have in place. Okay, so let's just dive right in here. Why do we care? Why is this important? First of all, don't we really want to be just good people who genuinely want our employees to work in a safe environment? And this isn't, I'm not talking about all emotional, warm, fuzzy type of thing. I'm talking about striving to be an employer of choice, one where employees are safe and they're able to do their job in an effective and efficient manner. But secondly, dealing with harassment complaints can be stressful. As a manager or an owner, you already wear multiple hats in your organization, and you're driving business results. You're working to improve processes and products, and you're already putting out daily fires, as well as trying to manage people. So if or when you have these types of complaints, it takes time away from what you're doing and what you're hired to do from a business standpoint. So aside from the stress, managing these complaints is actually quite costly. It can have indirect as well as direct costs to you and the company. So let's look at what some of those costs might be. So I have 8 things listed on the screen for you today. Again, there will be others. This is just an overview here. So first of all, increased absenteeism. Why is that a problem? Well, if you don't have your employees at work, then somebody else has to actually do their job, and oftentimes that's going to fall on you. And then we have a lower employee morale. That takes a toll on relationships in general, and not just for those people directly involved, but for others too. Morale is a very difficult problem to fix, and once it's low, it tends to spread across from department to department. Turnover, that's expensive, right? We've got recruiting, we've got new hire costs, training, lots of pieces there that can get quite costly. Decreased productivity, again, people who are focused on dynamics in their workplace are not focused on their work, so they're being less productive. We've got legal action. I don't know if you've worked with an attorney and looked at their fees, but they're expensive. So dealing with those and working with attorneys and those legal fees can add up quickly. And again, the company's reputation, that's something that is hard to put a cost on, but even if the claim doesn't get publicized, word could get around as a bad place to do business or as an undesirable place to work. And again, you really can't put a price on that. Let's look at litigation and liability. So you've got everything from attorney's fees, administrative penalties. You could have to pay back pay, pain and suffering, and punitive damages. All of those things are expensive. But what I really want to focus on here is what's called vicarious liability. When we talk about your responsibility as an owner or a manager, vicarious liability is the reason why it's so important to handle harassment situations appropriately. Vicarious liability is a legal doctrine that holds the company liable for discriminating or harassing acts of its supervisors because supervisors are considered agents of the company. Okay? So in addition, if an employee is being harassed by a coworker or third party, the company is responsible if the company knew or should have known, which is key here, about the situation and failed to correct it. Knew or should have known means either the employee complained to a supervisor about the problem or the conduct was so blatant that the supervisor should have been aware even if no formal complaint was made. So the key point here is that supervisors are responsible to know what's going on. Business owners are responsible to know what's going on, even if they're not physically present. Being too busy is not an excuse. Okay. So now we've identified some of the impact and some of the costs associated with harassment. So let's understand, what is harassment? We have to know what it is so we can know how to avoid it. Typically, people use the term harassment very loosely to describe behavior they consider rude, inappropriate, and just sometimes unfair. But legally, the term harassment means a specific class of behavior that satisfies several legal elements is present. Let's look at this a little bit more closely. Okay, so discrimination based on an actual or perceived protected classification. I want you to notice that the or perceived part, someone doesn't have to actually be in the class if you are making decisions because you perceive them to be in a protected class. That is still considered harassment. So hopefully you're asking yourself, or maybe you already know, what are these protected classes? So race, color, religion, national origin, gender, pregnancy and childbirth, age, disabilities, veteran status, and genetic information are all protected classes. One thing I want to point out here is that sexual orientation and gender identity are protected under Title VII. They're not listed on this wheel, but they would fall under that gender category. Okay, so when we talk about the legal doctrine of discrimination, and we refer to protected classifications, this is the information I want you to remember. Okay, so now we've talked about what it is, right? Discrimination based on actual or perceived protected classification. Let's look at what it's not. Rudeness, personality conflicts, you can see the list there. As we mentioned previously, oftentimes harassment is used very loosely to describe a behavior that people consider rude, inappropriate, or unfair. However, without the protected classification, harassing behavior does not meet the legal definition. Now, all of these behaviors listed here may cause employee relations issues, which are problematic in and of themselves, but they would not be considered harassment without adding that protected classification, all those things listed on that wheel. So let me give you an example. An increased workload or production expectations for all workers due to increased business. That's not harassment, right? No protected class. An increased workload or production expectation only for, let's say, Hispanic workers or only for women due to increased business. That's harassment, right? We've got protected classes involved. Again, in order for it to be considered harassment, a personal or protected trait must be an issue. Now, let's look at 3 types of harassment. We're going to quickly touch on sexual harassment, hostile work environment, and secondary harassment. The first one we're going to look at here is sexual harassment, quid pro quo. Quid pro quo means this for that, meaning a trade is being made. It's often the case of a person in a position of authority demanding romantic favors or sexual conduct in return for receiving or keeping job benefits. Or it could be in return for avoiding adverse job action. So again, person of authority. This can be verbal or physical. It could be a real or implied threat. The threat, again, it doesn't have to have actually occurred. It's the implication. Instigated by someone in a position of power, often a supervisor, a manager, a director, and it doesn't have to be a direct report. It could be someone that the employee sees in a position of authority, maybe not their own supervisor. And it can occur just one time to be considered harassment. Now, this will include things like any unwelcome touching, requests for sexual favors, repeatedly asking someone out, gestures, messages, jokes, etc. And this happens to be what's all over the media right now. This is hashtag that's harassment or this is harassment. That's one that literally addresses this quid pro quo. Okay, so that's sexual harassment. Let's look at hostile work environment. These are the conditions that create a hostile work environment. Behavior or conduct involving, again, protected classification, right? That's how it becomes harassment, both objectively and subjectively offensive. When we talk about objectively offensive, we are using the reasonable person standard. So a reasonable person would find the conduct offensive. Subjectively offensive means the complaining employee found the conduct offensive, but not everyone else did. Okay, so it could be objectively or subjectively offensive. The conduct is so severe or pervasive that it negatively affects the work environment. If it's severe, it only needs to happen one time. If it's pervasive, we're talking about a repeated pattern of behavior. Okay, it interferes with the employee's ability to perform his or her job. And again, it can be verbal, nonverbal, or physical. So that's hostile work environment. These are the conditions that would be present for hostile work environment. And lastly, we're going to look at secondary harassment. This is one we don't often think of. This is when harassment occurs when harassing behavior is not directed at one particular individual, but the person who actually witnessed the behavior is offended. So when we talk about secondary harassment, the bottom line here is that everyone has a different level of sensitivity. So we need to, as managers and business owners, learn to treat people at their comfort level rather than your comfort level. People are a lot more sensitive than they used to be. And, you know, it's natural to build relationships with people that you work with. However, and I'm not telling you not to do that, however, it is essential to keep those relationships and those conversations professional at all times, regardless of how close you may think you are. And so when we look at secondary harassment, the key here is perception, right? It's about their perception, not even necessarily the intention of which things happen, but perception. Okay, since we're talking about perception, what do you see in this photo? Are you seeing a duck? Or maybe you're seeing a bunny? Or maybe you're seeing something completely different. And even though we're all looking at the same picture, we may literally be seeing something different. And so it's important to remember that people can perceive the same things or situations very differently. And regardless of which image you saw, the point is that not everyone saw the same picture. What may look like a duck to you may be a bunny to someone else. And great managers have to have the ability to look at a situation from all perspectives before arriving at any judgment or conclusion. So the point here is that sometimes we need to change our point of view to see someone else's perspective. Okay, so we've defined harassment, and I've given you a lot of information in a very short time, and you're probably thinking, okay, Corey, what am I supposed to do? Well, you've already completed the first step, which is important, and that's to begin educating yourself and become more aware of harassment. But let's go back to our original question. Would you know what to do if an employee claimed harassment? I have broken it down into 4 steps here. So first of all, you want to interview the complainant, interview all witnesses, anyone involved, okay? You want to maintain confidentiality as a business owner or manager. If you are involved in the decision-making process, you are not to disclose information on any disciplinary actions that may be taken with employees who are part of the investigation. You need to take action. What's appropriate to resolve this situation? What does the complainant need? Prevention is important. How do we ensure this doesn't happen again? And retaliation. Remember when I mentioned that retaliation is the #1 complaint filed with the EEOC in fiscal year 2017? That's why you need to know what it is, know what it looks like, and how to prevent it from happening. Retaliation is a separate charge. Oftentimes the first charge will fail, but the retaliation charge will succeed, okay? So you need to be aware of that. Okay, so we have some time, and I like to do a test your knowledge, just a few scenarios. So we're going to run through some of those. I'm sure you're all going to get these right. You'll have great scores by the end of this. So let's look at a couple of scenarios here. All right, first one. Which actions are unlawful harassment? A, Betsy calls her colleague into the next cube, Betsy calls her colleague in the next cube a dishonest, nosy busybody. B, several times a week, Lou sends emails containing evangelical material to 2 coworkers he knows are atheists. C, Adam is very attracted to his coworker. He often rubs her shoulders when she visits her office, even though she has repeatedly asked him not to. D, Denise, a manager, tells Jane, a new trainee, that she will not be promoted unless she goes on a date with her. E, Kathy sends her manager, Frank, a card on his birthday. Which one of those are harassment? Well, B would be harassment, C, and D. I'm sure you all got that right. Look at another one here. George tells a questionable joke to Anna. Anna feels it's offensive and tells him so. George refrains from telling similar jokes in the future. Could this situation be possible harassment? Probably not, right? It's a mildly offensive joke. That's an assumption. And George stops the behavior. This was handled appropriately, right? Anna tells him to stop. George stops. We're moving on. How about this one? Ben's coworker regularly makes profane comments that offend him. The comments include telling Ben, among other things, I'm tired of your Christian attitude and your Christian blank all over the place. I'm going to file a complaint against you next time I sneeze and you say, bless you. You're just doing it for attention. You wear it on your sleeve like a badge, and I'm sick of it. It offends me. Would the actions of Ben's coworker constitute a hostile work environment? Yes. What's the protected class here? Religion, right? Okay. One more. Julie is a 60-year-old cashier at a coffee shop. One of the regular customers often complains that she is in a hurry, so she doesn't want that old person to help her. Could this be considered harassment? Absolutely. The protected class here would be age. Right? I'm sure you did great. Okay, so wrapping it up here, I really hope I've shown you today what harassment is and why it's important that your company take it seriously. You really do need to be prepared to handle situations as they occur and really work to understand how to prevent it. I think we're almost out of time. Do want you to know if you have some questions, you're welcome to type those into the chat log, and we will respond to those offline.
Great. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. We know that these types of employee relations issues can seem overwhelming, and it's just one of the areas we like to help our clients with. If you're facing challenges like this in areas of human resources or employee benefits, risk management, or payroll, we'd love to talk to you. Thank you all for attending.